Life has a way of testing the strength within us, not by what we conquer with others beside us, but by what we face when the crowd is gone and silence becomes our only companion. In those moments when the world expects you to collapse under pressure, a strong woman learns how to rebuild herself, not because it is easy, but because survival and destiny demand it. This sermon is about that woman, the one who gathers her broken pieces, wipes her tears, and rises again, even when no one is clapping for her, even when no one sees the fight it takes to keep going. The strength of rebuilding alone begins with the decision not to surrender. Life will always present us with two doors when adversity strikes: one that tempts us to give up, to stay in the ruins, to let the weight of disappointment crush us until we no longer try again, and another door that is harder to open, the door that demands that we choose to keep going. A strong woman who rebuilds herself alone does not wait for someone else to push her toward that second door. She makes the conscious decision to walk through it, even if her legs are trembling, even if her heart is shattered, even if her spirit is weary from the battles she has fought. The decision not to surrender is not made once. It is made daily, sometimes hourly, because when you are rebuilding yourself, there are constant reminders of what was lost, what didn't work, and what feels impossible to repair. Choosing not to surrender means refusing to let pain write the ending of your story. It means saying, yes, I am broken, but I am not finished. The woman who rebuilds alone has to remind herself that just because her circle is empty does not mean her destiny is canceled. She understands that strength is not measured by the absence of struggle, but by her ability to stand in the middle of struggle and still declare that there is more to come. She knows that surrender may look like an easier choice, but it robs her of the chance to see the miracle that can rise from the ashes of her life. When rebuilding, loneliness often becomes the loudest voice. Friends may leave, family may not understand, and support may feel like it has evaporated. In those moments, it is tempting to give in, to believe the lie that you cannot do it alone. But the strong woman decides that even if no one shows up to hold her hand, she will still hold her own hand and walk forward. She will still look in the mirror and say, I am enough to begin again. That decision is the birthplace of true strength because it means her faith is not dependent on applause or validation, but on her own willingness to rise. The decision not to surrender is also an act of defiance against the voices, internal and external, that whisper failure into her ears. Every time she chooses to get out of bed, every time she wipes her tears and takes another step forward, she is declaring war on those voices. She is proving that they may talk, but they will not win. Her decision to rebuild becomes a silent but powerful statement that life may have knocked her down, but it did not knock her out. Strength in rebuilding alone also requires recognizing that surrender is not just laying down in defeat. It is also settling for less than you were created for. A strong woman does not rebuild for the sake of returning to comfort. She rebuilds because she knows she was made for greatness. To surrender would mean to stop short of the promise, to accept a lesser version of herself when God has called her to be whole, powerful, and complete. By refusing to surrender, she is not only protecting her future, but also honoring the divine assignment within her. At times, the decision not to surrender looks like small steps. It may not always be loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is simply choosing to get up and pray when your heart feels too heavy, or applying for opportunities even after rejection, or deciding to love yourself again after betrayal. These small acts of courage stack up over time, becoming the foundation of her rebuilding. The strong woman knows that strength is not always in the big victories, but in the small, consistent refusals to give up. Ultimately, the decision not to surrender is what separates those who remain buried under their pain from those who rise and rebuild. It is the inner fire that keeps burning even when the storm has blown everything else away. It is the whisper of resilience that says, I will not let this break me. For the woman who rebuilds alone, this decision becomes the cornerstone of her new life, the first brick laid in the foundation of her comeback. Pain is not a full stop. It is the pause where resilience is born. Too often we see pain as the conclusion, as if the heartbreak, the disappointment, or the failure is the end of our story. We look at pain as a signal that life is over, that nothing good can come from what we've endured. But the strong woman who rebuilds herself alone understands that pain is not a burial, it is a planting. It is not the punctuation that ends the sentence. It is the pause that allows a new chapter to be written. Pain, though uncomfortable, becomes the soil in which her resilience is cultivated, and it is through that resilience that she rises stronger than before. When pain comes, it strips away illusions. It removes the false layers we build around ourselves. The idea that we are in control, the idea that we can avoid hardship, the idea that everything will always go according to plan. Pain interrupts comfort and demands attention. Yet in that interruption lies an invitation. It is an invitation to go deeper, to discover strength she didn't know she had, to see herself not as a victim of circumstance, but as a vessel being prepared for something greater. Pain exposes weakness, but it also awakens strength. The pause of pain is not an easy one to sit in. It can feel long, suffocating, and endless. Days feel heavy, nights feel lonely, and the future feels uncertain. But within that pause lies the quiet work of transformation. Just as a seed must break in the dark soil before it can grow into something living, so must a woman often break in her pain before she can emerge into her destiny. The pause is where God begins to reconstruct identity, to shift perspective, to deepen faith. Though nothing may seem to be happening outwardly, inwardly resilience is being born. Resilience is not built in times of ease. It is formed in the fire of adversity. The strong woman who rebuilds herself alone does not wait for the pain to disappear before she begins again. She learns to work with it, to let it teach her, to allow it to sharpen her endurance. She knows that pain is temporary, but the strength it produces can last a lifetime. When she chooses to see pain not as punishment, but as preparation, it changes how she carries it. Instead of being crushed by it, she is refined by it. There is something powerful about refusing to let pain dictate the narrative. When others would use their wounds as excuses, the strong woman uses hers as evidence of survival. Every scar becomes a testimony that she endured what should have broken her. Pain becomes her reminder that she is capable of withstanding storms and still standing tall afterward. Resilience is not about ignoring pain or pretending it doesn't hurt. It is about acknowledging the depth of the hurt while still deciding that it will not define the end. In the pause of pain, silence often amplifies the voices of doubt, fear, and insecurity. But it is also in that silence that resilience whispers, "Keep going." Resilience is born when she decides not to let the pause last forever, when she takes the broken pieces of her pain and starts arranging them into a new foundation. She does not wait until everything feels perfect. She moves even in imperfection. She understands that progress in the midst of pain is still progress, and resilience grows each time she pushes forward despite the weight she carries. Resilience born from pain also changes how she relates to others. A strong woman who has rebuilt herself alone becomes more compassionate, more understanding of the struggles of others. Her pain has trained her heart to see beyond the surface, to empathize with wounds that others may hide. What once felt like a curse becomes a tool for connection, a bridge to help lift others who are walking through their own pause of pain. Her resilience becomes contagious, inspiring others not to give up when they too feel like pain has put a full stop in their lives. The pause of pain is also where vision is recalibrated. Sometimes pain closes doors that were never meant to be walked through. Sometimes it ends relationships, careers, or dreams that would have led to destruction. Though it hurts, it redirects. Resilience is born when she learns to trust that the pause is not the end, but a redirection towards something better. It is in that pause that she learns to listen more deeply to the voice of God, to trust His timing, and to believe that the delay is not denial. At the heart of it all, pain becomes the training ground of resilience because it forces a woman to rise without the guarantees of comfort or certainty. It demands that she believe in possibilities she cannot yet see. It calls her to stretch beyond her limits and to prove to herself that she is stronger than she imagined. By refusing to see pain as a full stop, she redefines it as the comma that leads to a new beginning. She understands that the pause may hurt, but it is also holy, for it is in that place of breaking that resilience is born, and resilience is the strength she will carry into every chapter that follows. Silence becomes the loudest place where God reshapes identity. In a world full of noise, opinions, and distractions, silence can feel like the most uncomfortable space to occupy. It is in silence that you come face to face with yourself, stripped of the voices that once affirmed you or tore you down. For the woman who rebuilds herself alone, silence is not just an absence of sound. It is a sacred classroom where God begins to reveal who she truly is beyond the labels, beyond the expectations, and beyond the mistakes that tried to define her. Silence has a way of exposing what we've been running from. When life is busy, when we're surrounded by people, it's easy to drown out the internal conflicts, the insecurities, and the wounds. But in silence, there is nowhere to hide. The strong woman who rebuilds alone learns that silence is not punishment, but preparation. It is in that stillness that she can finally hear the whispers of God that were once drowned out by the chaos of her life. It is in that stillness that clarity replaces confusion and identity begins to be rebuilt. When the noise of the world falls away, she starts to hear the truth of who she is. Silence gives her space to realize that she is not defined by her past failures, not chained to the words spoken over her by others, and not limited by the disappointments she has endured. God uses silence to remind her that her worth is not negotiable. He reshapes her identity by speaking to her spirit in a way that no human voice could ever do. Silence becomes the canvas where he paints the vision of her new self, a self stronger, wiser, and freer than she has ever known. In silence, she begins to understand that identity is not built on titles, relationships, or achievements. Those things can be stripped away in an instant. True identity is rooted in who God says she is. It is in those quiet moments when the applause has faded and the crowd has disappeared that he whispers, "You are chosen, you are loved, you are enough." Those words sink deeper than any affirmation the world could offer because they are eternal truths. They shape her identity not for a season, but for a lifetime. Silence also reshapes identity by revealing hidden strength. When no one is around to encourage her, she learns how to encourage herself. When no one claps for her progress, she learns how to celebrate her own growth. That internal resilience becomes a part of her identity. She is no longer someone who depends on the validation of others to move forward. She becomes a woman who moves because she knows who she is, even if no one else sees it yet. In silence, she discovers that her strength was never meant to come from the noise of the world, but from the still, unshakable voice of God within her. There is also a refining that happens in silence. The strong woman who rebuilds alone realizes that some parts of her old identity must be let go in order for her true self to emerge. Silence reveals the pride, the fear, the doubt, and the insecurities that once held her back. It forces her to confront them, to lay them down, and to let God reshape her from the inside out. This process is not easy. It feels lonely and it requires vulnerability, but it is in that stripping away that authenticity is born. Her new identity is no longer built on what she pretends to be, but on the truth of who she is becoming. Silence also has a way of amplifying divine direction. Without noise, she can finally hear where God is leading her. She can sense his nudges, his corrections, and his encouragement. Her identity is reshaped not just in who she is, but in where she is going. Silence positions her heart to align with his will, teaching her that her destiny is not about meeting the world's expectations, but about fulfilling God's calling. That calling may require her to stand alone, to walk unfamiliar paths, or to trust without evidence. But because her identity has been reshaped in silence, she has the confidence to do it. Most importantly, silence teaches her that her identity is secure even when unseen. She learns that being unseen by people does not mean being unseen by God. In fact, it is often in obscurity that he does his greatest work. Just as seeds grow in hidden soil before breaking through the surface, her identity is reshaped in the hidden silence before it is revealed to the world. The woman who rebuilds alone understands that silence is not a void but a womb. It is the place where her new identity is being formed, nurtured, and prepared to be birthed into something powerful. When she emerges from that silence, she carries an identity that is unshakable. The opinions of others can no longer define her. The mistakes of the past can no longer confine her, and the uncertainties of the future can no longer intimidate her. She knows who she is because she allowed silence to become the loudest voice in her life, the voice where God reshaped her identity and reminded her of her worth, her purpose, and her strength. Every broken piece carries the blueprint for a stronger version of you. When life shatters your plans, your heart, or your sense of direction, it can feel as though the fragments left behind are useless. Brokenness often convinces us that our story is ruined, that the cracks are permanent, and that nothing whole can emerge from what has been destroyed. But the strong woman who rebuilds herself alone learns to see brokenness differently. She realizes that every piece, no matter how jagged, carries within it the design for her rebirth. What looks like fragments to the world are actually the raw materials God uses to construct a version of her that is wiser, more resilient, and more unshakable than before. Broken pieces tell a story. Each fragment holds evidence of what she has endured, the battles she has fought, and the storms she has survived. Instead of discarding them, she begins to gather them as reminders. Every scar is not a symbol of weakness, but a testimony that she made it through. The cracks in her soul become pathways for light to enter, allowing wisdom and compassion to flow where pride and perfection once lived. A strong woman understands that her brokenness does not disqualify her, it prepares her. The blueprint of her strength is etched in the very places where she once thought she was ruined. It is easy to despise the broken pieces, to wish life had not torn you apart. But healing begins when you shift your perspective. A broken piece of glass may seem worthless on its own, but when placed in the hands of a skilled artist, it can become part of a mosaic more beautiful than the glass ever was before. In the same way, when God takes the fragments of a broken life, he weaves them together into a masterpiece that could not have been created without the breaking. The woman who rebuilds herself alone trusts that every piece matters, even the ones she wishes she could forget. Every broken piece also carries a lesson. The pain that cracked her heart also revealed the importance of boundaries. The betrayal that left her shattered also taught her discernment. The failure that bruised her ego also birthed humility. Nothing is wasted. Each broken moment holds within it the blueprint of a stronger, wiser woman who is learning not to repeat the same mistakes, not to place her worth in the wrong places, and not to fear starting over. She understands that brokenness is not the end of her, but the schooling that sharpens her for her next chapter. There is also strength in the process of piecing things back together. Rebuilding requires patience, and patience produces endurance. Every time she picks up a broken piece and decides to place it in her new foundation, she is exercising faith. She does not wait for the picture to look perfect. She trusts that eventually the pieces will form something meaningful. In doing so, she is building not just a new life, but a new mindset, one that refuses to crumble under pressure again. Her brokenness has taught her that fragility does not mean failure, it means humanity, and humanity is the place where grace meets growth. A strong woman also discovers that broken pieces connect her to others. While wholeness can sometimes appear distant or intimidating, brokenness is relatable. People are drawn not to her perfection, but to her authenticity, to the way she carries her scars with strength. Her transparency becomes a blueprint for others who are still trying to gather their fragments. By showing how her broken pieces were transformed into strength, she gives permission for others to believe that theirs can be too. What once felt like shame becomes a source of influence and inspiration. Every broken piece also deepens her dependence on God. Alone, she cannot make sense of the scattered fragments. Alone, she may feel overwhelmed by the mess. But in his hands, the blueprint becomes clear. He takes the piece she wants to hide and uses it to complete the structure. He takes the piece she thought was destroyed and places it where it holds the most weight. The strong woman learns that her brokenness was never meant to be hidden but surrendered. And in surrendering, she finds the strength to keep rebuilding. As she moves forward, she no longer sees brokenness as a weakness. Instead, she carries it as a badge of honor. Every broken piece reminds her that she survived, that she overcame, that she is not the same woman she once was. The stronger version of her is not despite the broken pieces, but because of them. Her blueprint is not flawless, but it is unshakable. It has been tested by fire, weathered by storms, and proven by resilience. What once felt like a pile of useless fragments now stands as the foundation of her new identity. She no longer despises her scars. She cherishes them as evidence of her becoming. Every broken piece has been gathered, redeemed, and woven into the design of a stronger, bolder, and more powerful woman. She rebuilds not by erasing her brokenness, but by embracing it, knowing that within those pieces lies the very blueprint of who she was always meant to be. The journey alone is preparation for leadership and impact. Walking alone can feel like exile, like punishment, or like abandonment. But for the strong woman who rebuilds herself, solitude becomes her training ground. What feels like isolation is in fact incubation. The quiet path she treads by herself shapes her into someone who not only survives adversity, but also leads others out of it. Leadership is never born in comfort. It is born in the fire of loneliness, in the space where you have no one else to lean on but God, and in the process of discovering your own capacity to keep moving when no one is watching. A woman who rebuilds alone learns lessons that cannot be taught in crowds. When there are no voices guiding her, she is forced to tune into the inner compass of faith. She discovers how to make decisions with courage, how to trust her intuition, and how to hear the still, small voice of God in the silence. These lessons are not only for her survival, but for her future role as a guide to others. People follow leaders who have walked through the fire and came out stronger, and her time alone becomes the evidence of her strength. Leadership requires endurance, and endurance is only built through struggle. The lonely journey is full of obstacles that test her resolve, unanswered prayers, doors that close, friends who disappear, dreams that delay. Each obstacle strengthens her endurance muscle. She learns that she can stand even when her knees are shaking, that she can walk forward even when the path is unclear, and that she can rebuild her life even when resources are scarce. This endurance becomes the foundation of her leadership because it shows others that resilience is not theory, it is lived experience. Solitude also strips away dependence. A strong woman who rebuilds herself alone learns that she cannot depend on the applause of others to validate her progress. She cannot rely on external support to sustain her momentum. In walking alone, she learns to draw strength from within, to build confidence not from popularity but from perseverance. This independence becomes essential in leadership because true leaders do not wait for consensus to do what is right. They move forward with conviction, even if they are the only ones standing. The journey alone also teaches her empathy. Having experienced the weight of loneliness herself, she becomes sensitive to the struggles of others. She knows what it feels like to be overlooked, to cry in silence, to rebuild without encouragement. That lived experience softens her heart and sharpens her compassion. When she later steps into positions of influence, she leads not with arrogance, but with empathy. Not with control, but with understanding. Her leadership carries impact because it flows from authenticity. People can feel that she has walked the road they are walking. Another aspect of leadership formed in solitude is vision. When you are surrounded by noise, it is easy to adopt the dreams and goals of others. But when you are alone, you are forced to ask yourself, who am I? What do I want? What has God called me to do? In that quiet place, vision is born. She begins to see her life not just as a series of struggles, but as a calling. The clarity she gains in solitude becomes the compass that directs her leadership. She is not swayed by trends or opinions because her vision was birthed in silence and anchored in divine purpose. Impact requires depth, and depth comes from walking through the valleys. A woman who has rebuilt herself alone has gone deep into pain, into reflection, into self-discovery. That depth gives weight to her words and authority to her presence. When she speaks, people listen because they sense she has lived what she says. Her impact is not in her charisma, but in her authenticity. She does not need to perform leadership. She embodies it, because the journey alone has prepared her to carry influence with integrity. Most importantly, the journey alone shifts her focus from herself to others. At first, solitude feels like survival, but over time, she realizes that her rebuilding is not just for her. It is for the people who will one day need her story as proof that they too can rise. The impact of her leadership is measured not by titles or positions, but by the lives she touches, the chains she helps break, and the hope she ignites in others. The strength she gained alone becomes the strength she offers to those who feel too weak to stand. By the time she steps into her role of influence, she is no longer the same woman who once felt broken and abandoned. The journey alone has prepared her for the weight of leadership. She is no longer seeking recognition. She is walking in purpose. She is no longer chasing validation. She is creating impact. The solitude that once felt like punishment has proven to be her preparation, shaping her into a woman capable of leading with wisdom, compassion, and unshakable strength. Rebuilding is not about returning to who you were, but becoming who you were meant to be. Too often, when life falls apart, the natural instinct is to reach backward, to try and reconstruct the life we once had, to long for the version of ourselves that existed before the heartbreak, the failure, or the loss. But the strong woman who rebuilds herself alone comes to understand that the goal is not restoration to the old. It is transformation into the new. She realizes that every storm she endured was not designed to return her to where she was, but to propel her into who she is destined to become. The woman she once was cannot carry the weight of the future she is walking into. The old version of herself, while valuable for that season, does not have the capacity for the calling ahead. So the rebuilding process demands more than patching up old wounds or reconstructing old patterns. It requires becoming. Becoming means embracing growth, accepting change, and allowing God to shape her into the version of herself that can stand in greater strength, wisdom, and purpose. When she first begins to rebuild, the temptation is to cling to familiarity, familiar relationships, familiar habits, familiar mindsets, even when those very things contributed to her breaking. But as she walks through the rebuilding process, she learns that comfort and destiny rarely coexist. To become who she was meant to be, she must release the version of herself that only survived but never thrived. She must lay down the old to make room for the new. Rebuilding is not about returning to comfort. It is about stepping into calling. Every new version of her requires a shedding of the old. She sheds self-doubt and replaces it with confidence. She sheds the need for approval and replaces it with conviction. She sheds fear of failure and replaces it with boldness. Each layer she releases brings her closer to her authentic self, the woman she was always meant to be, but could only discover through the breaking and rebuilding. The process is painful because it requires letting go of identity she once clung to. But it is freeing because what emerges is truer, stronger, and unshakably rooted in purpose. Becoming who she was meant to be also requires vision. She stops asking, how can I get back to where I was? And starts asking, who am I becoming through this? That shift changes everything. Instead of measuring her progress against her past, she measures it against her potential. Instead of longing for what was lost, she leans into what is possible. She learns to see herself not as damaged, but as developing, not as broken, but as becoming. This shift in perspective is the heartbeat of her rebuilding journey. The process of becoming also teaches her patience. Growth does not happen overnight, and transformation cannot be rushed. The strong woman who rebuilds alone understands that every season of waiting, every moment of uncertainty, is shaping her into someone greater. She learns to trust the process, knowing that each step, no matter how small, is leading her closer to her true self. She stops resenting the slow progress and begins to appreciate the beauty of gradual transformation. What makes becoming so powerful is that it is not limited by her past. Who she was may have been marked by mistakes, regrets, and limitations, but who she is becoming is marked by grace, strength, and possibility. Rebuilding is her chance to redefine herself, not by what she has endured, but by what she has overcome. She is no longer bound by the identity shaped by pain. She is stepping into the identity shaped by purpose. Becoming who she was meant to be also equips her for impact. The old version of herself may have lived for survival, but the new version lives for significance. She is no longer consumed by what she lost. She is fueled by what she can give. Her transformation positions her to lead, to inspire, and to break generational cycles. The strength she gains in her rebuilding is not just for her, but for the countless others who will one day look at her life and find the courage to rebuild their own. By the time she emerges from her rebuilding journey, she is not recognizable to the woman she once was. She carries herself differently. She speaks with authority. She walks with confidence. She loves with compassion. She leads with integrity. She is not a copy of her old self. She is an evolved, elevated version, forged in fire and polished by resilience. She knows now that the purpose of her breaking was never to destroy her, but to uncover her true design. Rebuilding is not about going back. It is about becoming. And the strong woman who rebuilds herself alone embraces this truth fully. She understands that the best version of herself has not been lost in the ruins. It is waiting to be discovered in the process of rising again.